Okay, greetings. I was going to speak sitting down, and so I was going to be somewhat less formal sitting down. I think it invites a more discussion-based tone. I'm still going to do that, even though I'm standing up. We're at the end of a long day. It's a very well-informed crowd. You've also received a lot of information over the course of the day. And some of the points that I have in my outline to make came up en passant in the first session in response to some questions. So I'm going to say some things in summary form, and I'm happy on Q&A to expand a bit more, if that is of interest. What I would like to try and do, since this is the last panel, is to focus on a forward-looking set of questions that we should ask ourselves as international lawyers, as actors in the international realm who are concerned about justice, right? I presume from everything I've seen and heard that we share a commitment to justice, which is not the norm, I would say, in general among lawyers or among almost any audience. Justice in the truest, best sense. And we might diverge around the edges, but I think we can see the great contours of justice. And if we agree on that, then we can try and think through an agenda for international law and international lawyers moving forward. But before I get to, and I won't purport to be prescriptive, but I may purport to offer some suggestions about directions in which we might care to move as international law actors concerned about justice. I just want to, in very summary form, lay out what I think to be some of the main points of the crisis that we now face in international law. And I mentioned this before, but the speech given by Mark Carney, I think, is really, in a nutshell, a wonderful point of departure to understand the current crisis. And it's a wonderful point of departure because Mark Carney, speaking from a position of relative power, Prime Minister of Canada, a country clearly wealthy, Western, first world, and historically closely, umbilically tethered to the United States, in a very public forum, comes out and says, the game that we have been playing for decades can no longer be played because the United States is now run by a cabal. He doesn't say this. I'm going to add a few words. Sorry, not a direct quote. Jim, I don't think Prime Minister Carney said that. So this is me now. Me. We'll get back to Mr. Carney later. By a cabal of gangsters working with ethno-nationalists to promote a grifting with grifters allied with Silicon Valley and, to some extent, Wall Street, who don't have a particular ideology other than their own personal well-being, and who are absolutely morally bankrupt, as the latest tranche of Epstein files demonstrates. And it is true, and I gave a talk along these lines at the European University Institute in Florence on Tuesday, I'm losing track of time, Wednesday of this week, where I focused on what it means for the world to have this cabal of thugs running the United States. It is true that there have been and are bankrupt governments in other parts of the world, one. And it is also true that what the United States is doing now is not new. It has antecedents in US history. So again, I always push back, I said this earlier when people say this is un-American. No, there are deep roots of this, but it has reached a level in the United States that is historic in its absolute contempt for the idea of international law. So the most powerful state in the world with the wherewithal to threaten any country, place in the world, and maybe carry out on that threat, to seize heads of state and make them stand as defendants in US federal court, to prop up genocide. The state that has that power is not even pretending to be constrained by international law. Okay, so that's the nature of that's the crisis. That's the crux of the crisis. There are other ancillary related elements of the crisis. The erosion of the United Nations, which we've heard about, the failure of powerful European states to even pretend to apply international law in a fair manner. Ukraine, invasion, bad. Pakistan, Palestine, no statement, right? So the absolute hypocrisy of other powerful states, also part of the crisis. Okay, enough on where we are. I probably spent 5 minutes and 11 seconds, not just probably, definitely, at this stage, which is perfect. We have the crisis on the table. I wanted to think about how we should consider what international law might be moving forward. And to do that, about all we can do, other than just invent futures, is to look to past experiences and draw lessons. And there, if you look at the most similar crisis, different in many important ways, I would say is the late 1930s. And in the late 1930s, when it became increasingly clear that there was going to be a global conflict as serious, maybe more serious, as the Great War, as the First World War, a number of people in that period worked to develop international law principles, ideas that later would be implemented after the Second World War. In the midst of a situation of crisis, of growing fascism, Nazism, okay, so there were people at that time, a few names you could think of: H.G. Wells, Raphael Lemkin, Hersch Lauterpacht. You think of the Atlantic Charter, the FDR For Freedom speech. But all of these we can sort of, and some better than others in different ways, and happy to talk about that in Q&A. But basically, there are people who, in the midst of crisis, are thinking, we hope and pray and trust there will be something on the other side of this crisis. What should it look like? What do we want it to be? How can we build that now, even if it seems like we're working on Mission Impossible? Okay, so that is. So I spent days thinking, what would a new world order look like? And the last lesson from history, I still have 3 minutes, that I want us to go back to. If you look at the formation of the United Nations and the United Nations Conference on International Organizations in San Francisco in 1945, when the United Nations is created, you see that there are very serious tensions between mid-power states and the most powerful states on a number of dimensions, including the relative power of the Security Council vis-a-vis the General Assembly, on the role of human rights in the United Nations, on how much power, if any, the United Nations Human Rights Commission would have. And on the read of Carol Anderson, who I'm citing, I always give credit to who I'm citing, basically the United States is on the wrong side of these debates. And it's on the wrong side of these debates because the U.S. domestic political governance, the Truman administration, is beholden to the white supremacist Klansmen, Dixiecrats, that they need to have a majority within the Democratic Party. And so they capitulate, and the most famous capitulation is the Domestic Jurisdiction Clause, which John Foster Dulles works into the United Nations Charter, which basically you can't do anything because you cannot engage if something is within the domestic jurisdiction of a state of the United Nations, which is kind of everything, right? Well, almost everything could be defined as within the domestic jurisdiction. So it basically neuters the United Nations in terms of human rights ab initio. Okay, last minute or so. A path forward. I flag that because I think that tale about the United States' role in crushing the dream of the United Nations as a force for equality, democracy, et cetera, right? Which is almost diametrically opposed to the discursive move of the United States, 4 or 5 years earlier, right? Like that, the switch is very telling, and it is, I think, being replicated today. That in the crisis now, we cannot count on the United States to be on the side of the righteous. So that's where we are, what to do. And I am of two minds. And we've been talking about this all day, and I would love your views, thoughts, critiques, and panelists and everyone else in the space. I see two paths. I'm not sure which path is more desirable. So one path is to cling to the United Nations, to, despite everything, try to strengthen the United Nations, right? Recognizing that the Security Council is fundamentally flawed, that the United States has the veto, and other countries do, although they use it rarely. But in the hopes that one single global body can deliver us if we make it strong enough, right? I don't lean in that direction. I lean in the direction of, okay, the mask has fallen, the legitimacy of the system has been made manifest. The United States has decided we're going to have a club of thugs called the Board of Peace, which is a privatized group of highly suspect states and businesses. We're undermining the legitimacy of the United Nations with the help of the Security Council and the United Nations itself. So we're going to move away from a single, unified, global body. And if that's what's happening, then I think we need a competitor. And what we need is a coalition of states, and I know it's time. Oh no, a coalition. 1 minute, please wrap up. I will. That's what I'm doing. Sorry. I used to, when I would have his job, I would write it on both sides because the public embarrassment actually, gets the person to like, 1 minute wrap up. Now I have 40 seconds to wrap up. Okay. A coalition that brings together the best of Europe, European states that are willing and maybe forced or kicked, dragging and screaming to work towards a governance body that's just. States in South America and the Americas, in the global South, South Africa, other regional leaders, Kenya, Nigeria, in Africa, Asian countries, India, Indonesia, China, bring those states together and use the economic and other pressure of those states in a body. Some new name, United Nations for Justice. I mean, if they can call their thing the Board of Peace, we can shoot for the stars. We have a better claim. But I think we should start thinking, I'm a professor, I have graduate students sometimes who want to write papers or dissertations. Start thinking and outlining and designing what would another global body with states that are committed to the rule of law, democracy, and core principles of human dignity, what could it look like? What should it look like? Because I think we're at a point where we're failing. And then the last thing I will say is, if I can find it, one of my fears in making a proposal like this, I don't know how many people are listening to me or supporting this kind of proposal, is a quote from Antonio Gramsci, who said, "The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born," which describes, I think, our moment. But this is the kicker that's problematic. Now is the time of monsters. So on that, I will leave it.